Good afternoon. Actually, morning, I guess. Hi, and welcome to my commercial for Snippets, or as I like to call them, the Connected Campaign Power Tool. I'm Marianne Fields. I am a marketing technologist, a certified Pardot Consultant, and the marketing ops manager for Givelify. Let's see. Most of you love Pardot, so that's why you're at ParDreamin. But you know that there are a lot of hidden gems that are not really part of the Quick Start Guide. As Pardot and Salesforce continue to grow closer together on the platform, you're going to find that there are a lot of these wonderful hidden gems. Today, I'm going to give you a few reasons to track down the details and explore the possibilities of snippets within your org. Let's see. First, if you don't know about snippets and they're simply reusable content that can be associated with campaigns or business units, and they reside in the Salesforce standard object or standard campaign object. They're available to Pardot email templates and landing pages. And, you know, that's exciting. I mean, it really is. Reusable content is very exciting. But by living in the Salesforce platform, these little gems are available to any Salesforce org with permissions, as well as any processes on the org. And that's the really exciting part for me. So it expands their management beyond just the marketing team and allows you to leverage data from throughout your org. That means you can distribute ownership, you can distribute quality control checks, and you can share the burden of having accurate. Oh, I'm seeing in the chat we're still having some audio issues. Let's see if I can do anything about that. Again, I will switch to headphones. Bear with me. Hopefully that is better. If you can let me know in the chat, we'll go from here. Okay, it may just be individual users, but let's admit it, I'm a little gun shy after my presentation on Thursday. All right, let's get back at it. So I'll come back to why I think it's so cool that you can share ownership of the data. But first, let's talk about marketers and effective marketing campaigns. A great deal of the burden of a marketer, beyond just trying to create incredible marketing campaigns, is trying to make sure that they're accurate, that they're intimate. And intimacy is often established through very specific details that are very timely and can really take a marketing from ho-hum to that next level. So what we always say, I mean, every marketer said this a million times, that we are trying to send the right message to the right person at the right time. Personalization is a huge part of that, and details are a huge part of conveying that personalization because you're giving them the details that they want. But of course, every marketer knows that the more details there are in the collateral or in the asset, the more QC, the more going and fetching those tidbits and making sure they're right. So that is one of the biggest challenges for frontline marketers. There's so many details that are constantly changing that much of the process revolves around, as I said, gathering, updating, maintaining, and QCing these details. However, since they are essential, it's work that must be done. So let's look at some of the details. If you were to look at anyone's pre-flight checklist, you're going to see, confirming that all of these details are correct. Whatever details they're including in the campaign, I'm a little ahead of the slide, but they're going to have dates, action URLs like registration, click here for your offer, pricing, products, presenters, partners, discounts, locations, and I'll get back to COVID protocols, but all of these things become so important in trying to make your campaigns effective and intimate. So imagine the value of putting ownership of the details back in the hands of stakeholders. This allows those stakeholders to control the data they manage while allowing marketers to move more quickly with confidence that those details are going to be accurate based on the people who own them having the ability to update them, and additionally having the ability to send them through reporting and whatnot. So traditionally, the way marketers share ownership of details is by routing briefs, routing proofs, and getting sign-off by other people, or by creating this master document with all these details and then QCing it themselves, which kind of leaves the marketer hanging out on a limb by themselves when they go to send that email. And, we all kind of have that little prayer that we got all those details right, and that, we don't have to, dig back into that template and switch them up at the last minute, because, nothing ever changes at the last minute. So one of the values of Snippets is that because you're distributing ownership and the details are coming in through merge fields, which we'll talk about, you have that advantage of making sure that you're focused on the most effective campaign, not just being able to stay ahead of the details or the burden of building. So the key benefits of Snippets in this usage are visibility. You really want to leverage this integration between Pardot and Salesforce. And there's several other ways that it's pretty cool, but for me, this particular feature is the coolest. And like I said, it's a love letter commercial for Snippets. Visibility is key. The fact that you can produce a report that is going to show you all of the snippets associated with a campaign, or with all the campaigns if that's what you want, and you can route that report. You can. It's also possible to set up tasks off of them. Because again, it's standard Salesforce functionality. So you're able to leverage that with all the goodies that exist in Salesforce. That leads us to accessibility. Anybody with permissions can edit the data from Salesforce. And if it's data that lives in another object, you have that ability to shuffle the data between these using a tool like Flow. Versatility. With Snippets, you can use them as content blocks, and you can also use them as granular facts. And you can put those in email templates or landing pages. And then availability. Because they're available through Salesforce, as a standard sale, they can be created, deleted, updated, etc. with Flow. And to me, that is a huge piece, because you're adding muscle to your overall team, because marketers are not responsible for doing it all themselves. There are some prerequisites for using Snippets. First and foremost, you have to be using connected campaigns. And I guess I say that you also have to be on the Pardot Lightning app. That's how you'll manage them. And finally, it's going to be leveraged through HTML or handlebar merge language. So when you're planning for Snippets, those prerequisites are, key. But then, that's kind of all in marketing territory. But then when you start thinking about what data needs to be included in the campaign, in the past, I know I have often had to consider, like, how specific do I want to be versus how much effort is it going to take to manage these. So, with this different perspective, it makes it a lot easier to say, we can share this burden. I'm going to get the most accurate data, so I don't have to spend as many rounds routing something or proofing something. I can focus on the execution piece. But you really do have to think about what kind of data you want to include. As I showed you earlier, dates are huge, and the use case that I'm going to talk about, we were dealing with events, so registration URLs, venues, speakers, even exhibitors that were participating. These are all things that are changing late, and we definitely had them all in our event system, but we wanted to have them in the email. So the way we were doing it was cut and paste. So, it's the same planning, but it's thinking, okay, well, do we need a flow that's going to pull this data from somewhere else in Salesforce? Or do we just need to train another team on how to update the snippets directly on the campaigns? So let's see. So that gets you into who's going to manage it and how. And then the final piece that I like to think about is the content blocks versus the individual values. Again, I am very partial to granular data, so individual values like street, address, city, state. This allows the marketer the maximum flexibility to where if they're presenting them on an email template, they can arrange them one way. If they're presenting them on a landing page, they can arrange it in a different way. However, there are sometimes when the arrangement of the data is very specific, like maybe with a product description and SKUs and specs. So a product marketer may want to control how that looks within the email or the landing page. In that case, you can provide a content block that the marketer can just take and know that it's arranged just the way they want it. So I said we were going to talk about real-world applications. As I said, my previous company, which is where we really took this all the way through and landed it, was Recruit Military, that hosts about 140 career fairs on site in 60 cities for employers who are looking to recruit veteran talent. So the logistics of that were pretty intense, and they were actually managed on our Salesforce platform by our logistics team. So all of the data about the event was in Salesforce. It was up to date. It was exactly what we needed. But for several years, we were literally copying and pasting those into flex fields within Pardot in order to not have to update them on templates, because at any given time, we had roughly 30 active campaigns supporting the event schedule. And obviously, that would be a lot of things to edit if you had to make changes down to the minute. By putting them in flex fields, we were able to step back a hair, but we were still having to copy and paste every event detail, which I think we had 38 per event, into flex fields that we were then using an automation role to update the values on individual prospects and then merging them into the actual send. Flow allowed us to step back even further and actually capture all of those event details off of our custom event object, create snippets on the individual campaign, and then we had an additional button on campaign that would let us refresh those anytime there was an event change, or if we just wanted to make sure we had the latest and greatest before we went to press. The next iteration that we had planned that, I don't know if it's come to pass, was hopefully to be able to trigger that refresh based on changes in the data, so that then the marketer would never really be responsible for having to make sure their information was current. The other application I really wanted to mention was COVID. A lot of businesses that have really succeeded, or at least survived well this year, have been because they've been able to provide their customers with up-to-the-minute information about, availability, delays, alternate, if there were alternate forms of business based on COVID protocols. Any of those details, getting them disseminated to their customer base is hugely important, and they change all the time. So it was it's really important to be able to have that information controlled in one place, which, if you're using the CMS tool, that's an excellent application. But regardless, if it can be controlled in one place in Salesforce, then that can be pushed into your campaign, or you can actually control it on snippets on your campaign and have it be up to the date on autoresponders or nurture emails, or whatever you're doing, or even engage templates that your salespeople are using. So it takes the burden, again, off of the marketer of trying to keep those information, those details up to the minute. There are many other applications. I think product is a really good example for e-commerce and whatnot. So you're really looking as you're planning through how you're going to use snippets to think about what's the life cycle of the information, where is it coming from, who can help keep it up, keep it current. And this is kind of my sales pitch for snippets, is that they are one of the undiscovered gems in your Pardot Salesforce org. With a few prerequisites and planning, you can drive engagement with specific, accurate details that are maintained by stakeholders throughout your organization. Further, through partnering with your admin and learning to utilize Flow, you can power snippets from other objects, standard and custom, within your org. Snippets can set your Pardot team free from chasing down and verifying details managed by others without sacrificing email and landing pages that are anchored with information that drives outcomes. And I really wanted to read that because I really want that to hit home, that the use case for snippets in its simplest forms is just being able to park a detail on a snippet and be able to use it in every asset on the campaign. If that's all you do with it, it is definitely worth looking into and using in your organization. But if you can step back and consider the ownership and shared responsibility for that, I think you can get a lot more out of your marketing team with a lot less resources, which I think we're all trying to do this year. Well, I face it, as marketing, we're always trying to do that. So I did want to, shout out to a couple of people. Talmadge Zipper is the person that kind of taught me the power of Salesforce and how far marketers could take it. And he is awesome and yet somewhat accidental in his death. He's way beyond that now. My WIC community, they have been incredible. And then some of our user groups, New Hampshire in particular, though I live in Cincinnati, I've been a virtual guest several times and really enjoy working with them. And the Pardot LifeX group are awesome. And if you're not connected in the Ohana, really consider reaching out, because it is a great group of people and they're very committed to helping everyone else. And finally, there are some additional notes for where you can get more information and what's coming next, of course, with Dreamforce next, our version of Dreamforce next week. All right. Emma, I think, if there are any questions, we can do a little Q&A. Looks like Martin Siegfried Davids asked, can you use images with snippets? And the answer is yes. You're going to want to definitely pay attention to graphic definitions and where you're getting your images from and keep up with them, but they can be used. And a lot of people are using them for logos and product images, from what I've heard. Are there any limitations you found with snippets? Not really. I mean, not in my experience. We did not do a lot of particularly complex programming with our stuff. We were using mostly out-of-the-box functionality, except for this. So if you were using other add-ins or particularly complex functionality, you might run up against some, but just in the, getting data from one place to another and getting it parked in an email, we didn't have any trouble with that. Dynamic content snippets, good question. So the thing about snippets is these are actual values that you're putting within the campaign, but they don't rely on any data within the record itself. So you're not basing it on a field value or any kind of segmentation. They're relative to the campaign itself. So it's all about your ability to reuse it. Dynamic content is going to be that, you want a different block based on the segment or based on a field value. There is some interplay, and I think you have the ability to tie them together. I'm not entirely sure because that's beyond my use case. It's a question worth asking and exploring. Let's see. A question about the campaign relationship. Certainly, I have had trouble myself as far as when you copy and paste, and I have heard, and again, they always say that they're working on improving the copying function, your ability to essentially clone, as some of us would call it, campaigns, and that would include all the assets under it. That's going to be your best bet as to how to execute this when you're switching campaigns. I will tell you, in our case, what we were doing, our events had an ID number. All the fields were the same except for the ID number. So what I was doing is actually going in and copying it with the existing campaign relationship, then going in and editing the HTML with a Control F to switch out the ID, and then I was reassociating the campaign with a new campaign. It was kind of tricky. It took some trial and error, but we were able to execute it that way. I think that is our time. I really appreciate everyone coming back and hanging out with me here on Friday so I can tell you about my love of snippets. And I hope that you all investigate them and start using them. They're a fantastic tool.